Hi, I'm Claire Blaylock, and I'm the Executive Director of the Architecture Foundation of Oregon. I'm so pleased to be sitting here in person, socially distanced, but in person, with two of the founders of KairosPDX, Zalika Gardner and Marcia Williams. And we're going to be chatting today about the state of education in our current climate, which seems to be changing, hourly, and also about learning and the massive paradigm shifts and how that impacts the creation of the community, which is something that all of us are experiencing differently than we have in the past. Kairos is also a school that has participated in the Architects in Schools program, and they are, hopefully, we're going to get them to participate again this year. But they are fellow practitioners of project-based learning, so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So, Zalika, Marcia, tell me a little bit about Kairos and how you all came to found this school.
Yeah, so KairosPDX, we actually incorporated it as a nonprofit back in 2012. We like to say we're more than a school, although that is our primary program, is our Learning Academy. But we started, it was 5 of us co-founders that founded the educational nonprofit. And actually, if you talk to us, we all kind of have our different stories, so I'll let Zalika share hers too. But for mine, I was a transplant, and I was definitely on a 2-year plan, because it's like, 2 years I'm out. But my husband took a job here, and when we got, my background actually is in health services research. And so when I started, we got pregnant, we were expecting. I started researching and looking at the data and was floored, to be honest. And literally, for me, that's where it started. I was like, okay, well, if I'm having a kid and we're living in Portland, we gotta figure this out. And so I started telling my husband, I said, well, I'm either gonna homeschool or I'm gonna start a school. And I always say God has the last laugh, because I'm doing both right now. But at the time, I was like, I can't homeschool. I mean, I still can't. I'm ready for school to open. So for me, it was really more the impetus around just my research background and learning. And then I literally just started telling people. So I was my circle, which was smaller at that time. And so one of our other co-founders was like, oh, I know somebody that also wants to start a school. You guys need to meet. And so that was Kali. And Kali actually knew Zalika and Karin, our other 2 co-founders. And so Kairos means a supreme moment in time, a special moment in time. And when we actually put in our application for the charter, we at the time had 75 years of collective experience.
Wow.
And so we talk about how Kairos, when you talk about how Kairos came to be, it came to be by the collectivism of people coming together with their different levels of expertise to bring forth a vision for something that I think started with all of us having our own individual needs, but at the end of the day, it's what this community needed. It's what the state of Oregon needed. It's what the city needed. And, while we kind of have the vision, none of it would take place without that collectivism. And I mean, a huge shout out to our board. We still have a lot of founding board members today. We have a working board who have been active. And really, we can't talk about the founding of Kairos without talking about the community that has invested in. And when I talk about community, I'm talking about parents who showed up 30 days before school was supposed to open and didn't have a building. I'm talking about, staff who were like, okay, so a lot of it was just like, we had the vision and we had people come alongside who were like, yeah, we think this is important. Yeah, we think this is needed. And Kairos has grown out of really a community need for saying and standing up and saying, this is not okay. How we've served our Black and brown kids in education in this state and in this city is not okay. And we can do better and we will do better. And so when I think about who we are who we are because of the community that has uplifted this need and been a voice for, what we talk about as our homegrown future leaders of Portland. So that's a little bit about how Kairos came to be from my perspective, and very different than, I think, I'm not an educator, I should say. Like I said, my background was health services research, so I didn't have that in me at all.
No, but the research background's really interesting. Do you mind telling us a little bit about what the research was that you were looking at that really kind of sparked that level of, okay, we got to do something about this, we got to move it forward?
Yeah, well, I think, because for me, I think, and it's interesting, we talk about historically underserved, and so when you look at the data, it really is about being historically underserved, because it's not about necessarily it didn't matter what I recognized. It didn't social economical factors did not matter in terms of how Black kids were served. And so when you looked at graduation rates for Black kids across schools, like whether they were in some of the better schools within at least Portland Public Schools, or whether they were in some of the, maybe not as highly rated schools, the graduation rates were really bad for our particularly Black and brown kids. And then when you look at third grade reading levels, same thing, really bad for our. So looking at the data, and when you look across, it was really clear that it was tied to race in a way that wasn't necessarily a class situation.
Yeah, interesting.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Zalika, how would you describe your experience with founding Kairos?
So I, unlike Marsha, I am a homegrown Portland native, and I have been an educator for the last 27 years, something like that. Excuse me. And I had started in LA, and then I came to Portland, and I was working in a private school, and I had just seen very different experiences for children and for families, for staff, like just across the board, like how extremely different an education experience can be. And it never sat right with me. Like I never was at peace with that. And then I just got to a place in my career where I hit the wall of I have to actually now do something. Like it has bothered me for long enough. And now I feel like I have some bandwidth that I want to do. And at that same time, as Marsha mentioned, our colleague, Kali Ladd, we had been friends, and she through the policy and me through the classroom, and we'd had many conversations about, what could it be like? And she just one day was like, we should really do this.
The texting, international sign for texting.
And it hit me at a time, my father had just passed very unexpectedly, and he was somebody who was a social justice champion, believed in community, believed that we're here on purpose for a reason to do some good in the world. And so it caused me to kind of do that reevaluation of, okay, what am I doing? And where is my intention? And it just coincided in what we call Kairos time with what Kali was willing to do. And so we literally, like that night, she's like, I have a whole project, and sent it to me, and then it just sort of rolled from there. And I am also a mom. I'm a mom of 3 kids. I have a 25-year-old, and then a 14, almost 15-year-old, and a recent 13-year-old. And so I had this big span between my 25-year-old and my younger 2, and so I got a chance to see sort of what education looks like, the long game, right? Yeah. And I had always been in elementary education, but I got to see the long game, and what I understood is that what you pour in the beginning continues to bear fruit of various kinds depending upon what is poured in originally. And if we really wanted to shift what we saw in terms of graduation rates, but also in terms of the way that students saw themselves as participants in society, we talk about Kairos as our kids are leaders. That's on purpose. We want that to be just in them, that they are leaders, have ideas that the world needs. And I knew that some kids were getting that, and I knew that a lot of kids weren't. And I really, really got to a place where I had to do my best to do something. And to Marsha's point, there was this group with Kali and I, and we were like, okay, we know who we need Karn, and then Jasmine brought Marsha, and the rest is history.
That's fantastic. Well, I think it actually segues really nicely into something that our organizations really have in common, which is our Architects in Schools program focuses mainly on 3rd through 5th graders. And we're big believers in starting that kind of project-based critical thinking, strategic thinking, design thinking, as we call it in the architecture community, starting that young and really building that foundation. And I know Kairos has a similar kind of mindset with starting early. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So we talk all the time at Kairos about the fact that we're building brains. Like that is what we're doing. We're in the work of building brains. It's built on neuroscience. Nothing that we do is accidental. It's fun, but not accidental. It's very intentional, and it is around giving children the opportunity to play and imagine and design, and then listening to them as they're doing that, because the ideas that come forth are worthy of more discussion and worthy of awe and amazement. And we often skip over that. The most creative people on the earth are 3 and 4 years old, right?
Yes,
I the most curious, right? And then often once kids hit school, it's like a reverse process of interest and engagement and curiosity and imagination. And we wanted to come directly the opposite. We wanted them to grow in their curiosity and their engagement in learning. I often say too, like, I want our kids to have like an addiction to that feeling of learning. Like, it feels so good when you're involved in something that matters and you're hitting big questions and you're bringing your own thinking to that question, and adults are listening to you and your classmates are listening to you and the words that you are putting out into the world, because it's a risk, right? Learning is a risk. And so the way that we manage that risk is to really value what children and the adults have put out into the world. And we feel like that practice then builds their brains in a particular way that allows them to be innovators and leaders and change makers in their world, to believe that their voice does have a place because they have hit school, and from the very beginning of school, that has been the practice around them and around what learning means. That it's not I come and someone pours in and I repeat back, right? That is a model of learning.
Yes.
And it does certainly help a child gain facts, and certainly does help a child gain a certain level of skill, but it's a very different way to design a brain than when my experience of school is I come, people ask me questions, I answer them, and we talk some more about it, and then we build it, and then we get some other opinions, and we put those ideas together. That is a totally different way to build a brain. And one of the conversations that we had really early on is that, I mean, the world is changing. We didn't expect this, but we knew that the world was changing so rapidly, and there was very little that we could know about what their world was going to be like in 20 years, because it changes so quickly.
Yeah.
But that being creative problem solvers was always going to be a necessary skill. And we wanted to set our students up for success, and we wanted them to feel engaged in that process literally from the moment that they hit school.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting to hear you talk about building a brain. First of all, it's a fascinating concept to begin with, but the way you talk about the methods of building a brain, that is, I think many people in the architecture and building community would say that's exactly how you build a building, is you sit there and you ask people for different opinions and you build it together. It is a collaborative process. And that's one of the things that I think I really have been the most energized by as I have learned about Kairos, and it's just this idea that it is a collective effort, the collective effort to found it, but also this collective responsibility of tackling this problem together. And I think that's really inspiring, and I think we need some inspiration in this moment, because there's been some challenges, there have been some changes. I watched one of the videos that you all put on the website, and there was something that really struck me. One of your teachers was talking to a younger child, I'd say probably kindergarten, first grade, and she said, we must remember that if we want everyone to listen to what we have to share, we must listen to everyone else. And I sort of stopped and replayed it, because it's such a simple, very foundational socialization message, but it also, like, that phrase is really kind of worldview altering. And I think it's very much at the heart of who Kairos is as a community. And I was wondering if you guys could speak to that.
Sure. So listening, I don't think I can speak expansively enough about how core listening is to our staff culture, our organization culture, and the classroom culture that we set out to craft with intention at Kairos. I think that for us it's twofold, at least, maybe more, but at least twofold. One of them is that foundational, to your point, worldview that says what I have to say matters. However, so does what you have to say. Mm-hmm. Like, that is a practice of community that is really core and important. It's a core skill to collaborate, to actually be collaborative, not just you work on this, we put it together, but actually collaborative means I've had to listen and value what it was that you had to offer. We also feel strongly that for young children, but then all the way up until adulthood, we really need to feel that what we have to say and who we are is worthy of listening, and the people around us have opportunity to mirror that for us, to say, yes, You are worthy. You are worthy of my time, of my full effort and my full attention. And that is, listening is an expression of that. And that our belief around young children is that when that, again, is their practice in school, they will bring their full selves. And we all know we do better when we can bring our full self to play with whatever it is that is happening and going on. And then they will begin to understand what it looks like to not be heard and listened to and not accept that, right? Not accept that as just par for the course, but instead fight for the kind of social justice and equality of voices that we want to see further on, that we really believe can change our communities just in general. So listening and the practice of it and our responsibility toward it and the way to be empathetic within it is just a huge piece of what we talk about fairly constantly, I would say.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of that is also the family component. Like, I know for me, I mean, I definitely was of the generation that you are to be seen, not heard, and you are to speak when you're asked to speak and not otherwise. And so I think we're also doing a lot of work with families. So the work that we're doing with kids and we're doing with our staff, we're also doing with families to also like really embrace this idea of value. And like Zalika said, making sure that people understand coming into Kairos, the type of space and environment we're creating is one where we're doing the active work. And so I think that's the component of it that I think really we're trying to capture families to really fully understand and immerse themselves in, is doing that active work of deciding this is something that you're going to actually participate in, which has been, for me, it's been phenomenal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It reminds me of the work that I read a study a while ago about the Harlem Children's Zone and that sort of whole family approach. And I see a lot of that in what you all are doing. So one of the questions I feel like that we are really grappling with as an architecture and building community is, I think over the course of this last year, things have really changed and a lot of people are more aware of the changes that need to happen. And they want to do better. But how do you, it sounds silly, but like, how do you take that first step? But how do you actually, what are some ways that we can actually sort of embrace that? Is it listening? Is it learning how to listen better? How do we move forward and start to be the change we wish to see?
I mean, we talk a lot about, that's a big part of what Zalika said, building brains. It's not just kids, it's our staff, it's our families.
Yeah.
And it's us. Like, I can't tell you how much my brain has been built just in the work that I've been doing at Kairos. And so I think what we've done, I could say, as Kairos, as a community, is we focused on what our strengths are, and our strength has been relationship. And so at Kairos, in this tumultuous time, we focused on relationship and we focused on the connection piece of connecting with people. Mm-hmm. And so our communication to everybody, and I think collectively to the community, extended community as you're speaking as well, is that really to figure out where you are, because I think what people try to do is they try to go outside of their scope or reach, and I think that just becomes harder. And so it's the same thing that we really try to encourage even our leaders and our staff, like, ground yourself in where you are, ground yourself in the things that you value, and then make a decision. It's really an active decision. Am I going to take an active stance against whatever it is that you want to be actively doing, and then figure out how to do that within your scope of, we all have power. And I think going back to Zalika's point, like, when you recognize that you belong somewhere and you have a voice and you're able to use that voice, that's the collective power we talk about. Yeah. And when we talk about Kairos being a school that's raising up leaders that are actively coming against whatever it is you believe is an injustice or not right, the ability to use that voice in a powerful way. And so I would just encourage, if you have a voice and have the ability to use your voice in your sphere of influence, that's going to be the most impactful. Because if we stay where we are, where we've been planted, and extend where we've been planted, that is, I think, where we can have the largest impact.
Yeah.
So
I think that's exactly right. The idea of taking account of where you are and how you can use your current position, that's an incredible point of leverage. But for the design community, I mean, these are people, we design buildings, but we also design communities. Yeah. We design the physical world in which we live. And I think that's something there is universal impact there. You know, people use the spaces that are being designed. So we need to ask the questions of, who are we designing for? Who's in the room when we're talking about it? What are the other points of view? And I know that the field itself, I think, has made some real strides in that area. But I know that even just this last year, it has really taken, as a community, a hard look at itself. And I think there is this momentum for a change and for action, and that's really exciting. It's really, really exciting and potentially really powerful.
And I think particularly in the design space, I mean, that is one of the things you can look at, particularly for schools. I mean, there's definitely communities that depending on where you live, your school looks very different. And I think particularly as you think about what's happening in this time, we have to have schools that are more technologically advanced and ready to take on kind of what's necessary moving forward with all the shifts that have taken place.
Yeah.
And so I think that's definitely within the design community something to be thinking about in terms of, like you said, the spaces that are and where is the focus, and looking at actively, there's going to be a bond measure coming up in the fall, and we're moving forward with the Center for Black Excellence, which Kairos has been involved in the community conversations around that, but really thinking about how do we focus on schools that have historically underserved Black and brown communities, and how do we ensure that we are putting the resource into the facilities to ensure that those spaces for those kids are going to allow them to thrive, because they haven't been able to thrive in necessarily historically over time. And so I think that's another place more specifically in that design space that I think is definitely something to think about and explore. Because I mean, I don't know enough about kind of all that goes in with opportunities, but we're definitely needing to shift the spaces that we're in.
Well, and actually that speaks to another really important belief that we have at the AFO, which is that access matters, right? It's access to even the notion that a career in the design field is possible for you. And not just here in Portland, but also in rural communities where there may not be architects or engineers who live there. You know, our goal is to provide pathways to access, because that is really how you bring more voices to the table. There has to be access points. A lot has changed for us here. I think that's safe to say. Both in Oregon, Portland certainly has been at the center of a lot of these discussions and protests, and rightly so. But it's also happened at a national scale. How have you guys, as leaders at Kairos, knowing that you have this very impactful sphere of influence, how have you adapted to the rapidly changing world, just from teaching, but also like how have you as a community kind of pivoted and adapted? It's very broad.
Yeah. Do you want me to start? So, coming back to what Marcia was saying about relationship, we have had to, like everyone, really think about what does it mean to take care of each other? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to take care of each other when the world is like expressing value for you, and what does it mean to take care of each other when the world is expressly expressing a lack of value for you? And how do we approach that and have conversations about that as young children, with young children? And how do we support families who maybe want to have those conversations, but are now thrust into it in a way that no one was really expecting, around, around Black lives, around worth, around equity, around social justice, in its various layers and forms. And I know for me, because my lane is around the experience that students and families have at Kairos, and how we take what's happening in the real world and turn it into classroom application. We've done some real careful thinking about how to make sure that children, even in this way, feel respected by us, mm-hmm. and feel that they also are part of conversations about real things and big things, and that they can be involved in conversations around real things and big things. But the primary thing that I feel like we really pushed into is that idea of really being explicit about caring for each other. We talk a lot about the fact that if we're really going to eliminate what we at Kairos would say white supremacy in education, one of the things we're going to have to do is rehumanize, because it is dehumanization that allows things to continue in such a way that literally eliminates access, eliminates worth, eliminates value for human life. So we have spent a lot of time on what does that mean to rehumanize? Like what does that mean? Coming back to what Marcia was saying about where am I in my own space, what we talk about ways of being versus things to do, right? And ways of being is in that category of things like empathy, right? Like how do we build and become aware of what things are blocking our empathy for others, whether they agree or disagree with our position, and how we manage compassion within that context. And children understand how to connect. They understand that when someone is hurting, you want to give them a hug. They understand that crying or that hurting or that feeling left out is the same crying and hurting and feeling left out that they themselves experience. So our work in this time period of sort of distance and remote is to connect as closely as we can, first of all, on a daily basis, and then come back over and over and over to how are we empathetic, how are we compassionate, how are we connecting to other human beings, especially across difference, be that skin color, be that ideology, be that economics, like whatever that difference may be. Compassion gets real when it goes across difference. Mm-hmm. It's easy when we're friends. It's way harder when we don't have those relationships already in place. And so we have practiced compassion for people struggling either through COVID or through things happening with social justice or all of those pieces. The conversations have been had across Kairos about, okay, let's hold them in our thinking and wish them good things, whoever they are. Because again, we're building brains.
Yeah.
So how are we building brains that their first instinct is into empathy and compassion? So my lens, but.
And I think from the community standpoint, we've been really active and vocal. We're sitting at a lot of tables.
Yeah.
We are ensuring that the voice of the Black community is heard. There is unfortunately a void at many of the policy tables of Black and Brown voices. And so we recognize that when we talk about our mission, it goes beyond, the at max 200 some odd families we're going to serve, but that we are committed to ensuring that we really change the narrative from a systemic approach. And so really understanding what it means to attack systems and to, and I say that actively, there's an active approach of really trying to dismantle some of the things that we know are not good for children and we know are necessary to change. And so trying to really capitalize on who we are as Kairos and that this is a special moment in time and really trying to ensure that that voice is heard and understood and a lot of collaboration. Like I said, we collaborate with a lot of partners, community-based partners and government agencies here. And a lot of that work is really tied into understanding community, what is needed. And I think the other piece for us, we also, I think, have, at least as a leadership team, have really tried to create a sense of we're not going back. There is a new normal, right? And so this idea that we have to be fluid. And so there's a level of fluidity that we've had to have with our families, with our staff, with everybody, and just trying to really make sure that we're in a space, we're moving in a space that allows for all that different range of emotion that happens with that, right? Because we're all grieving all different types of losses of all different types of things. And I think that's the other piece for us as leaders of this organization, really leading in that way, to say it's okay and to acknowledge and just to have those moments where we just have to, it's not business as usual. We can't just have a staff meeting today. No, this is not what we're doing today. We're actually gonna just check in and see how people are doing. And so I think that's the other piece that I think for us in terms of there's a need to definitely stop and pause and this is not business as usual. And I think that's important.
Absolutely, and I think that speaks to what you were saying of instead of action, ways of being. And I think that's a really salient point. Instead, action feels very concrete and very is sort of planned, right? But a way of being allows that fluidity. It allows that flexibility to be able to say, like, yeah, business, we are not in business as usual territory, but I am going to lead with empathy and lead with compassion. And I think that is where, you're right, like that's where change starts to happen. And this is a moment where we can use that way of being to really make some fundamental changes that are profoundly long overdue. So it's exciting to hear how you all put this into practice, because I think it's something that all of us can learn from. Absolutely. So a number of the firms here in Portland and across the state work on building schools, and they work on building learning environments. As an industry, like, how can they support meaningful change in the community and in the state and national level? It's a big question. I know. I ask a lot of big questions.
That's all right. Well, you spoke about the bond. I don't know if you want to say any more about that. But
That's an opportunity specifically for facilities around really trying to think about, particularly this is a cluster of the Center for Black Excellence, is this idea of really focusing. There hasn't been, and quite frankly, at the local level, state level, and even when you look nationally, there's nobody really talking about what it is that Black young students need. There's a lot of work being done, and part of why, you asked about even the why early, and we were very intentional about doing primary, because there's a lot done at the middle and high school, and we feel like that's too late, and a lot of it is catch up, and a lot of it is, and so this idea of really setting a firm foundation with kids is really critical and important. And so for us, the focus of primary and then what that looks like in terms of how Black and brown kids access education, that's part of what's behind the Center for Black Excellence that we're collaborating within community on. And the hope is that we can really put some dollars, and not just say, but dollars, behind spaces that can be used, particularly for communities of color, particularly Black and brown students, so that their learning can be enhanced by the environments that they're within. And so we know how much, like just from the research that shows, and like the environment that a child enters into, how much that has an impact on their learning. And so as you're creating these spaces, to your point, like really thinking about, there might even be small enhancements that can be done within schools. Like, so it's really, there are, I've heard of so many different organizations, and we've been blessed to experience a lot of different organizations with passion projects. And so there's always opportunities to do passion projects where it might literally be just going in and, taking a day and redesigning a space or redesigning a classroom, or there's always those opportunities to figure out if there's a way to partner within your community, within maybe some buildings that have been distressed. It's amazing how far paint can go, and how, I'm serious, just some small things. I mean, I know there's bigger in design. I'm not trying to downplay it at all, but I do think that there's a lot that people can do within, like I said, if you start where you are and see where are your systems of influence and where are the places that you want to invest your time and energy and effort, and then getting people alongside, because there's something about that collective pool when you feel like it's a value and you put your time and effort into it, the people that are around you who are watching that will want to too. And so I think this idea of thinking about passion projects, thinking about, like I said, opportunities for this bond, opportunities for schools that have, just have historically not been served from a facility standpoint and a design standpoint in the way that we know could optimize their learning and just ability to build their brains. It would definitely be a place to start.
Yeah. And the aesthetic is such an expression of worth and value also, right?
Wow.
When a student comes into a space that has been beautifully designed, you suddenly feel, oh, okay, I'm going to do great things here, right? And the converse is true as well. When you go into a space that has been neglected, it is have to fight harder to find that feeling, right? Because there's been communicated how important this space and your learning is. And so, there's opportunity in, I would imagine, every school everywhere to go in and take a little time and showcase the fact that you believe that it's time to invest in our young people. We talk about that often at Kairos, the fact that you are worthy of investment. We talk about children having been underserved, historically underserved for such a long period of time. But if we flip that, what has really happened is like one of our greatest resources has been squandered for generations. And they are worthy of all of our time and energy. They are a tremendous resource for this city, for this state, worthy of investment.
Yeah, that's a profound message, and I think actually a beautiful end point for us today. Thank you both for coming and having this conversation. I appreciate all the knowledge and the power and the enthusiasm and dedication that you are bringing to our city and our state. It really is truly inspiring, and I'm excited to keep learning from you all, and I'm excited to keep seeing what you do next. And I'm even more excited for AFO to be on your partnership team and to work and help however we can. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.